Hello and welcome to part 7 of the Assembly Language Sound series, the finale! A special welcome to those of you who are first joining us in this series with the last part. You might have a better time of it if you go back and watch some of the earlier parts first, as this one builds on them. Or you could just try this one first and see how it goes. Today we are going to answer 6 previously unanswered questions. A couple parts ago when I added voices, why did that shift the pitches? Where did the clicking come from? Does interactive basic work with background music? How can we add more waveforms? And can we play multiple waveforms simultaneously? Would 2 extra bits make a difference in our arithmetic? Or will it just be dangerous? Does the high-speed poke help when multitasking between basic and background sounds? Plus, lots of demos and comparisons. And finally, how you can download the demos and the engine and use it in your projects. This part is based on your questions and your ideas, so thank you to everybody who spent the time to share your thoughts in the comment section on YouTube and the conversations over Discord. And in general, thanks to everybody who watched. It's been very gratifying seeing that this has helped people understand stuff better and has inspired people to do things on their own. Now let's go and finish it up. Before we start, I have to acknowledge that pretty much everything I've been talking about in this series, from using the horizontal interrupt and relying on the trick to have it called only every 2 or 3 scan lines in order to send notes to the DAC, from these wave offsets and frequency values for each note that determine how much of the wave offset to advance through each time, and the code to sequence from chord to chord. All of the ideas and a great deal of the code came directly from the 4-voice music player written by Paul Fiscarelli and Simon Jonassen. So I want to thank the 2 of them greatly for all of the code and the conversations that they were generous enough to have with me. This series would not have been possible without them and all of this wonderful code. In part 5, we added voices one at a time, and I had this to say about it when I was done. That sounded good, but if you have a sensitively tuned ear, you will have noticed that the pitches seem to have shifted at some point. As I added voices one by one, I used MAME to look at the performance and to see if we were really getting called every other scan line. And as it turned out, by the time we added the 3rd voice, we were getting called every 2 to 3 scan lines, and by the time we added the 4th voice, we were consistently getting called every 3rd scan line. Hopefully this goes up by 2 each time. 38. Uh-oh. Went to 41. Oh, now it went up by 2 to 43. 46. Uh-oh. Our beam Y is at 252. 255. 8. 1. So let's get a little more precise. I'm going to play this tune the way it was originally intended in the key of C through my PC's digital audio workstation. So this is playing it in the proper key. And then I'm going to play it on the Coco, and we're going to see how it compares. We're going to start with just 2 voices. Perfecto! But we were expecting that because with 2 voices we were getting called every other scan line, which is exactly how we were tuning the notes to. Now let's see what happens with 3 voices. That time the keys were definitely different. The Coco was playing 3 semitones lower. Let's demonstrate. Alright, so indeed that was a match. Now let's see what happens with 4 voices. That was even worse, as expected, because with 4 voices we were consistently running every 3 scan lines, not every 2 to 3 scan lines. The Coco was actually playing 7 semitones low. What's going on is we made this assumption that the horizontal sync interrupt handler would be called 7,860 times per second. That assumes that our code gets called every other scan line, and we accomplish that by using code that takes a little bit longer than 1 scan line to complete. That means that our sampling rate is 7860 Hz. We have that many times per second to write a byte to the DAC. And that means that the frequency values that we calculated for each of the note pitches took that into account. This value tells us how fast we need to advance through the waveform, say the sine wave, so that we complete a cycle in the proper amount of time given the pitch of the note. But we're no longer getting called 7,860 times per second. We got to 7860 because that was half of the actual number of scan lines we can render in a second, because we were skipping every other horizontal sync interrupt. So if we've got 15,720 scan lines per second, and now we're getting called every 3rd horizontal sync interrupt, the new magic number here to divide by is 5240. So we need to take the note hertz, multiply it by 256 bytes per waveform, and now divide by 5240. Presto changeo! Brand new values. So if we use this, will our notes come back into tune? This next part was inspired by a short comment exchange. Thanks again for everybody who takes the time to comment and give me some tips about how there's some clicking between notes, between chords. And after a couple exchanges, it occurred to me that the clicking is something that I was actually going out of my way to cause without realizing it. The sound out routine, which is our horizontal sync interrupt handler, most of the time just goes ahead and sums some waveforms and then sends it out to the DAC. But it also accounts for durations of chords, and when the duration goes up, then it's time to move on to the next chord in the song. And what do I do when we move on to the next chord of the song? I reset the wave offsets to 0. These wave offsets are those self-modifying code values where the most significant byte is an offset into the wave table and the least significant byte is a fraction. And I guess it just seemed like a good clean thing to do. When you start a new note, you start at the beginning of the waveform. So each of these, wave off 1, 2, 3, and 4, got reset by this code. But we don't need to do that. Notes don't have to begin at the very beginning of a sine wave. What even is the beginning of a sine wave? It's an arbitrary point. Why not just pick up where the last note ended? Boom! Delete! All right, let's do an A-B comparison. So this is what it sounds like with those clicks. And here's what it sounds like when I remove those lines. Hopefully less clicks. I think so. I think that's less clicks. So what this is going to do is call the routine to play the song. It will print the fact that the playing continues, and then it will immediately return. It'll return back up to here and end. So we should hear the song playing while we're now inside the basic REPL loop. And in theory, we should be able to list the program if I can get the keyboard to respond to me. Let's see how well that works. All right, the cursor is kind of flashing. I'm hitting L. I. Okay, there's my I. Hit S a few times. There's an S. If I hit T and hold it, ooh, that kind of worked. Space and hold. Oh, that worked. Maybe just holding is enough. Let's just hold Enter, press and hold. There we go. Ah! Now we can enjoy our basic programming while the Coco serenades us. Neat! Neat! The key is to press and hold the keys. By the way, this does not work in MAME. Try it when I tested this out in MAME. I just had to repeatedly hit keys. The press and hold did not help. But I have to say, this is neat. Oh, now that was interesting. Why would an error cause it to, I guess it reset the interrupt handler and stuff? That's interesting. Okay, anyway, let's move on. Our music player has two exciting, fun-filled wavetables. You can choose between sine and square. Wouldn't it be nice, though, to have some more variety? Paul Fiscarelli has recently released a color computer waveform generator tool, and I have some links in the description both to his GitHub where you can download it, as well as to a video that he made which shows off all the features. I'm going to show off some features as well. I'm not going to be as thorough as he is, but I just want to show off some of the things that have been quite useful for me that I think might be cool for you. To download it, you just download the zip. And inside the zip are these files and folders. You just unzip it anywhere you like and then run this executable. There is no install program, so it's very easy. So I'm going to launch it now, and it will give me some warnings because I do not have VCC installed. If I did, there would be some cool features I could use where it would test out the waveforms that I'm creating, but I don't care. It'll run just fine without it. By default, it will generate a 256-byte waveform depending on the parameters that you give it. You customize the waveform by changing the level of each of these harmonics. So each harmonic is another sine wave, and you add them together, and you get all sorts of interesting waveforms. But to start with, I'm just using these presets. So he's got a sine preset, as well as a bunch of others. I'm going to turn this on so you can hear them as we go. And I could just stop right there. I could just pick each of these, copy, paste into my code, and I now have 8 waveforms for free. But something I think that's cool about this tool, even if you don't have a Coco 3, even if you don't have a Coco at all, even if you don't know anything about Cocos, this is an interactive educational tool. For example, what is a square wave? Well, the square wave I've been using is pretty extreme. It's just half high and half low. But if you generate a square wave by hand picking the harmonics that you want to add, and you've got 11 to work with, this is what it would look like to get you kind of on the way there. You'll see a square wave is just odd harmonics, and as you go further and further up, those harmonics go down, 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 and kind of smooth out. It looks like a kind of a logarithm scale. My guess is that if you added an infinite number of harmonics, then this would eventually approach a perfect square. But I guess Paul Fiscarelli did not have time to add an infinite number of sliders to his tool, so we're just stuck with 11. But you can feel free to experiment with these and just see what happens to the waveform, see how it changes the waveform. In fact, if I remove all the harmonics, I'm just left with a perfect sine wave. You can change the frequency up here, and that will change the tone that you're listening to, but it won't change this, because the frequency is simply how quickly or how slowly you advance through the waveform. You can also adjust what the max table value is. You'll see it's set right now to 3F, and that's perfect if I want to combine 4 voices. If all my waveforms are maxed out at 3F, and I multiply that by 4, then I would get all the way up to FC, which is the max that I can send to my DAC. But if you're building something with fewer or more than 4 voices, you can adjust this, and it will adjust the waveform that it generates. Again, I'm barely scratching the surface of this. Please feel free to check out the links in my description for this video, and you'll find Paul's video, which goes over everything. Up until this point, I have explicitly included 2 different wavetables. I gave them each a label, and I put those labels into a table, the waveform table. And that's how the interface to BASIC has worked. So BASIC would call set waveform, and the parameter would either be 0 or 1, and that would determine which wavetable we'd use. But we could be more flexible. I can just completely get rid of this and allow BASIC to pass in the page. So I can document where each wavetable begins. Everything is on a hex 100 byte aligned page. So for example, if this started at hex 4700, BASIC would pass hex 47 as the parameter and we would use this, or hex 48 and we would use this. But now I'm going to add in waveforms for everything that I've copied from Paul's waveform generator. Plus, this allows BASIC to specify any page of memory, RAM or ROM, and play it. It's kind of like my past videos where I would direct the video display generator at various points in memory so you could see basic working storage, disk basic working storage. You could see what's going on. Now, you can hear what's going on. You can play any set of 256 bytes as if it were a waveform. I suspect it will mostly sound horrible, but I am curious to try. Now I have a combination of my old wavetables and the ones generated from Paul's tool. So up here we have the 2 sines, and then we have the 2 squares, and trapeze, which is kind of like a square as well, and then a bunch of these other organ-type synthesized sounds. And now when BASIC wants to change the waveform, it knows it needs to pass in the page where the waveform begins. So rather than looking anything up in a table, I grab my argument, B contains the low order byte, and then I save that into my self-modified code. And you'll notice I'm saving it into +2 because I just realized that is incorrect. You want to do +1 because although B is the low order byte of what BASIC gives us, it gets stored into the high order byte of where the wavetable begins. That's that sequence of code that adds the bytes it plucks out of the different waveforms. And this is the thing that I want to change, the high order byte. And if we take a look at the generated code, this is the list file. The very first wavetable is included here, and that's right on a page boundary of 5700. And that should end right at 5800, and sure enough, the include of the next thing, WG sign, begins right there at 5800. And if I go down to the end, my last waveform ends here at 60F8 plus another 8, which will bring us right to 6100. A little later, I will demonstrate playing songs with the different waveforms so you can hear how they sound. But first, this is the wavetable that I've been using so far for the sine. And if you're really good with your hex, you'll notice that they're all multiples of 4. This is the sine wave that I got off of Paul Fiscarelli's tool. And if you're good with your hex, you'll notice they're not all multiples of 4. this has a nicer, smoother, gradual increase from hex 20 up to hex 24, and then on and on and on and up, and then back down again. Whereas my original one has all these jumps, multiples of 4. Why? Why did I do that, and why did he do that? When a number is a multiple of 4, the binary representation will have zeros and the least significant 2 bits. Why would I always have my lower 2 bits 0? Recall that the DAC is a 6-bit DAC, and it's the upper 6 bits of data register A on PIA 2 that go into the DAC. The lower 2 bits are not used with the DAC. Bit 0 is how we receive the cassette data input, and bit 1 gets sent out to the RS-232 data output. So A, these bits are not used anyway for the sound, and B, if I were to stick stuff into bit 1, the printer might go crazy. MAME has a neat feature where you can connect a virtual printer. So I have right now MAME connected to this file printout.txt as my virtual printer. And I have Chrome set to show the contents of printout over here, and I can just keep refreshing it and it will show what it's got. And so we can see what would actually happen. So I'm going to load a sample basic driver file to play some stuff, and I'll do a line list up to 100. And so first I'm just going to refresh here. It thinks it might be the language of course again, I guess. And I'm going to do that, and here I'm going to refresh, and you can see that it starts printing through 100. So what happens when I run? Now we'll try that again, but this time we're going to use one of the original waveforms that I had, which ensured every byte was a multiple of 4. And in our printer, we should see that printing out. There we go. Let's try running it. Not sure why there was that stray thing there. I'm not sure if that was part of the L list or if that was part of maybe doing the initialization routine. But anyway, you could tell that as it was playing, I wasn't getting any of the other junk. So the answer to the question of why I kept everything a multiple of 4 is to avoid the junk, because who knows, my customers might have a printer connected, and those extra bits don't make a difference. Or do they? If a tree falls in the woods and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? If bits are present, but they're never sent to the DAC, do they make a sound? There were a couple conversations in one of my previous videos about just that question. Bits that we strip away, do they actually play a role in shaping the sound that you hear? For now, I'm going to focus on the simpler of those two discussions and ask the question, can I have a full waveform, starts at 8 bytes, then I divide it by 4 so I can have 4 voices, and I leave those low 2 bits in? Originally, I tossed this out as something I wasn't even willing to try because I don't want to mess with the printer, and surely they wouldn't play any role. But as both of these discussions point out, those low 2 bits do play a role in addition. So when I add things together, they will help round things out, shape them off a little bit better. And then in the end, I can strip off those bottom 2 bits before I go to the DAC. But Lost Wizard had a very nice idea. You don't even have to waste any cycles in the interrupt handler stripping away bits at all. Rather than having to use an AND statement to strip them away, I can do something a lot more clever. In a previous video, I talked about how each of the 2 PIAs have 2 sides, and each of those 2 sides has a control register, a data register, and a data direction register. When we're talking to the DAC, we're using side A of PIA 2. And by default, the data register that I use to talk to the DAC is configured like this. The top 6 bits are output. They go out to the DAC. Bit number 1 is an output that goes to the RS-232. That's responsible for all the craziness we were seeing in the printer. And bit 0 is configured as an input that comes in from the cassette. I can use the control register to decide what direction these arrows need to be, and I can just fix the direction of this arrow. So by default, the data direction register has 1s in all of these spots and a 0 here. And that's because all the 1s correspond to outputs, and the 0 corresponds to an input. So I can just go in and say, you know what? I want bit 1 to be an input as well. That way I don't have to strip any bits off. I just send them all directly to the DAC as I'm doing now. I don't add any cycles to my interrupt handler, but I'm no longer sending garbage out to the printer. The code to do this would go in the init DAC routine. So I'll just bring us to the end where that new code gets added. The control register for that PS side is FF21. By setting bit 2 to be 0, that means that FF20 is no longer the data register. FF20 is the data direction register. I was actually not messing with this before at all, and now I'm just going to change it. So I'm going to set all the DAC bits to 1, the lower 2 bits to 0, and I just save that directly into the data direction register. And then I 1 out that bit from the control register and stick it back in, and that allows FF20 to return to being the data register. All of that nonsense is just because of a quirk of the PIA where it allows a single address to be used for 2 purposes. This bit decides whether it's the data register or the data direction register. So I needed to temporarily make it the data direction register to give it my instructions, and then I could set it back to being the data register so that when I send bits out to it, they actually go to the data register and thus the DAC. Now let's try that out. Yay, no more garbage. But does it actually sound noticeably better? Stay tuned. In a comment on my last video, Curtis Boyle notices that the painting of the house and the driving of the car was very slow and was wondering, did I try the high-speed poke to speed up the basic portion of that? And then Lost Wizard said that I don't think that would help because he's running Drivewire and therefore HDB-DOS is loaded into high RAM, keyword being RAM, and so there is no ROM to speed up with the high-speed poke. And then I said, but you know what, I could ditch Drivewire altogether and then load the code directly from a real hardware floppy, and maybe the high-speed poke would make a difference. I should try that out. So first I need to copy the files to my floppy, so I will load Drivewire for this portion so I can get them off of the virtual floppy and onto the real floppy. And I also need to do a drive off so I can access mine through 0 and then Drivewire through 4. Speaking of which, we need to go into Drivewire. And we have drive 4 connected here. So let's double check. If I do a dir 0, that should be my real floppy. Very nice. And by the way, I got plenty of space. And if I do a dir 4, that should be my Drivewire. There's nothing there. Okay, why is there nothing there? Okay, I was getting my drive pound and my drive commands mixed up. It's been quite a while since I've done this. So I'm going to make myself a temporary hard drive with a bunch of floppies in it. I'll call this hard drive for notes. And I will make, say, 10 floppies. Alright, so I don't need this. And I will add that to drive #0. Alright, so we got you here. And then I'll run XROAR with the Becker port. Actually, I need to go into instance 0 to be in the Becker port. Okay, there we go. So if I do a drive off, and then I do a dir on 4, hopefully we'll see this guy light up. Good, and it's nice and empty. So now I can attach my floppy that I have been using, my virtual floppy, directly to you. And so now I can do a dir 0, and I should see that. And then I can do a backup 0 to 4. Now I should be able to view that on dir 4. Very nice. Let's eject that. Eject. Attach the UI to the real Coco. And double check, I can do a drive off. And I can do a dir 4. And there's all my stuff. And so I'm just going to copy a couple files. Let's copy notes pl2 dot basic from 4 to notes pl2 dot basic 0. And that should go to my floppy. Those are good sounds. And then the same for notes bin. Copy notes bin from 4 to notes bin on 0. And if I dir my 0, looks like I got the stuff. Okay, so now we can reset and get Drivewire out of there. And let's load notes pl2. And if I list up until around 10, we'll see this is the part that starts all the music stuff. So this will set it into action. We'll return here and start doing the drawing. So I'm going to add line 3 to do the high-speed poke. Let us go. Yes, I think it's safe to say that high-speed poke definitely helps. So the way the auditioning of the various timbres is going to work is Basic is going to control everything. So Basic has the data for the parameters to pass to the waveform routine. These will specify which waveform to use. And then for help with printing, we have names of the different waveforms. And all the action happens here. I will run through all of the waveforms, print out the name, call the routine to make that waveform the current one, print 300 dots, and then move on to the next one. So it'll just continue to play the song, switching waveforms as it goes. And we can now mix waveforms in the same song. So we pick for each voice which waveform to use. And from my experimentation, that same song sounds pretty good with this combo. So the upper byte tells you which voice you care about, and then the lower byte tells you which waveform to use for that voice. So we're using a sawtooth for the bass, organ for the melody, triangle for the harmony, and sine for those very high notes at the top. Let's give that a try. And it keeps on repeating, so I think that's enough of that. And here I'd like to do a targeted test, a comparison between the two sine waves. The one that I did, where everything's a multiple of 4, and the one that I got from Paul Pasquarelli's tool, which is more pure, and should, in theory, if we have 4-part harmony and doing a lot of adding, In theory, this should be a cleaner sound, a little bit less noise. And so what I have here is an arrangement of Music Box Dancer, and it will just flip back and forth. So J flips between number 1 and number 2, meaning the my multiple of 4 and Paul's regular sine wave. Prints it out, sets that to be the wave to use, and then we print 150 dots, and then we move on to the next one. And then we do that whole thing 10 times. So we flip back and forth between them 10 times.
I don't think I hear a difference. It's possible that if I used different waveforms or different combinations of notes, maybe the difference would have been more apparent, but I don't think I can tell. Anyway, it's probably better to leave those bits in, so we'll just do that.
You too can hear the beauty and majesty of the sawtooth wave times 4 on your very own Coco. In the description for this video is a link to my blog, and in my blog has links to where you can download all of the code. I first give well-deserved acknowledgments to Paul and Simon for their 4-voice music player from which most of my code has been taken, as well as some of the other sources that I used. For many of you, all you'll really care about is this section on downloading and running. If you click here, you can get a virtual floppy that has the following files in it. So connect it to your Coco with Drivewire or Coco SDC, and then run the basic program of your choice. All of the instructions are here, and they describe what the basic files do. Pretty much all of the demos that you heard in this video are available here. And for those who want to dig a little deeper, there's a section on how to build the source where you can find the source. And some things to be aware of as you're using it and making your changes. Things are fairly fragile and fairly restricted because the point was to have something fairly simple and easy to understand without too many bells and whistles. Although by the end, I guess I did end up adding back many of the bells and whistles I was planning to remove, but not all of them. And finally, there are some Java helpers that I use to help generate the frequency values for the notes and more. And then some ideas of things that you can do.
Well, that covers it. I hope you found this installment interesting or entertaining. Even though I've called this the finale, that doesn't necessarily mean this needs to be the last video on assembly language sound. There is stuff I would like to explore in the future. For example, how's about the 1-bit DAC? I'm quite curious how that works and how I might be able to add a 5th voice for free. Or how about envelopes? Attack, decay, sustain, release. Even the very simple example in this book uses the envelopes that I have not used at all, and they make an interesting change to the sound. Or how about sound effects in general? How do people sculpt interesting sound effects and add that to their game? How do we do FM synthesis? How could we sample arbitrary sounds and play them back on the Coco? How about the speech sound cartridge or the Orchestra 90 cartridge? What can they do and how do we program them? And what about the YMF262 in the Mega Mini MPI? I don't know what that is. And how am I reading stuff off of the phone if I'm shooting stuff with my phone? Wait, what?